Baking bread is fun and easy with an automatic bread maker. And now you can enjoy the homemade goodness of freshly baked bread without the hassle of hand mixing and kneading and without the mess. Through this video, you'll learn step by step how to use your bread maker to create a wide variety of delicious breads and doughs. You'll also receive the additional benefit of many time-saving tips and hints from years of research in the Regal test kitchens. This video is a supplement to the guide and cookbook that came with your bread maker. We urge you to read it thoroughly before you bake your first loaf. Assuming you've done that, let's get started. First, you need to remove your bread pan. Just rotate the handle counterclockwise and lift it out. Wash the inside of the bread pan and the kneading blade. Although the bread maker does the work, you still have to do your part by using the right ingredients and measuring accurately. Using a soup spoon in place of a standard measuring spoon practically guarantees a failure. So let's make sure we have everything we need to get started. Dry measuring cups, a liquid measure, measuring spoons, and a straight-edge spatula. We're going to start with the classic white bread recipe found on page 27 of your cookbook. It calls for 1 cup water, 2 tablespoons butter or margarine, 3 cups bread flour, 2 tablespoons dry milk, 1 tablespoon sugar, 1½ teaspoons salt, 2 teaspoons active dry yeast. Since the temperature of ingredients is one of the variables that could affect the quality of your bread, we suggest you have everything at room temperature. The cookbook has some shortcuts that get your ingredients from the refrigerator to the bread pan in practically no time at all. It's so much easier to add ingredients into the bread pan when it's on the counter, and you'll always want to add them in the sequence listed in the recipe. Now, the first ingredient is water. Now, I want to stress how important it is to be accurate in your measuring. When you're measuring the water, or any liquids, you need to stoop down to see if you're hitting the mark. We'll add the water, like so. Next, we'll add the butter or margarine. Either one will do fine. I always cut it into small pieces so it warms faster and mixes easier. When measuring dry ingredients, always fill the measuring cup to overflowing by spooning it into the cup. Then simply level off with a straight edge spatula. Never scoop the cup directly into the flour. It won't be accurate, and it'll give you more flour than the recipe calls for. It's always best to do your measuring away from the bread pan to avoid accidentally ruining a loaf by spilling extra ingredients into the pan. Next, we will add the dry milk, 2 tablespoons, and sugar, 1 tablespoon. Carefully pour the salt, 1½ teaspoons into the corners of the bread pan. Now, since salt inhibits yeast action, we add the yeast, 2 teaspoons, away from the salt. We developed our recipes using active dry yeast. If you prefer to use a fast-rising yeast, such as Rapid Rise or Quick Rise, merely decrease the amount used. As a general guide, we recommend using 1/2 teaspoon of fast-rising yeast per cup of flour. For example, this classic white recipe would use 1½ teaspoons of fast-rising yeast. We've added water, butter, bread flour, dry milk, sugar, salt, and yeast. To get the bread pan into the bread maker, set it down, rotate it slightly to the left, and then twist it clockwise to lock it into place. Now, if it's not in there right, it won't mix. To choose the setting, press the select button. Now, your panel may look slightly different depending on which model you have. Each time you press the select button, you will hear a beep, and the lighted dot will move to one of the 6 settings. We're doing the 1 1/2 pound classic white bread. So we simply press the select button one time, then press the start button. The display will read 2:30 and will begin counting down. In only 2 hours and 30 minutes, you'll have delicious homemade bread. During the first cycle, you can see that the kneading blade is mixing the ingredients. After about 10 minutes, you'll want to check the dough to see if any adjustments are necessary. Now, while your bread maker is designed to do all the work for you, remember things like humidity, temperature of ingredients, or exactness of measurement can all affect the size, shape, or texture of your bread. Once you identify the cause, a simple adjustment or two can result in a perfect loaf. As you can see, the ingredients are starting to form a ball. The dough should have a soft, even texture like this. Well, this looks great. We'll let it continue. While that's going on, let me show a few instances where you would want to make some adjustments. If your bread maker begins to knock while kneading, or the dough ball is dense and irregularly shaped, the dough is too dry. A dough that is dry will give an uneven or irregular top, possibly cracked, and the finished loaf will be short, maybe even doughy inside. Not exactly what we're looking for. If the dough looks like this, slowly add warm water 1 teaspoon at a time until the dough looks soft and smooth. It takes time for the water to work into the dough, so give it a minute before you add more. It looks like I need 1 more teaspoon here. When it's too wet, it may rise okay, but it could fall during the bake cycle, or it could over-rise and mushroom over the bread pan, or even hit the lid. But remember, even if your bread doesn't look perfect, most of the time, it will still taste good. So if your dough looks like this, wet and sticky, add flour 1 tablespoon at a time until the dough forms a soft, pliable ball. Again, give it a minute to mix in before adding more flour. As soon as you've made the required adjustments, close the lid and let the machine continue. After the knead cycle is complete, the first rise begins. Notice how the dough ball looks after it's finished mixing and kneading. It is soft enough to slowly relax towards the corner of the bread pan, and as the dough rises, it will fill into the corners. After the first rise, the machine punches down the dough, taking out the air. Now the dough rises to its final shape before baking. When the bread is baking, you'll want to be careful. The cover of the machine is hot, and steam escapes from the back of the lid. Now, when the bread is done, the buzzer will sound 3 times, and the display will read 000. Press the stop button, and carefully open the lid. Now, always use a pot holder to avoid the escaping steam. To remove the machine, use a large pot holder or oven mitts. Turn the bread pan counterclockwise to unlock, and lift it out. Remove the bread from the bread pan as soon as possible after baking is complete. If you leave it in, the crust will become soggy. Hold the bread pan upside down and gently shake the bread out. There we go. If the bread cannot be removed easily, turn the bread pan over and turn the drive shaft on the bottom of the bread pan. But be careful, this is hot. Every once in a while, the kneading blade comes out with the bread. You can use a plastic or wooden utensil to remove it from the bread, but remember, that kneading blade will be hot, so don't try to remove it with your bare hands. Let the bread cool on the rack. Now don't store it in the refrigerator because that makes it dry out quicker. For longer storage, you can put it in a freezer bag, seal, and freeze it. One of the great things about automatic bread makers is the versatility you have for customizing recipes to your taste or nutritional needs. For instance, you can use practically any liquid in most recipes. You might want to experiment with fruit juices, fruit or vegetable purees, even beer. Now try different cooking oils in place of butter or margarine. Take a look at page 18 of your cookbook for a complete list and some helpful hints. When you're done, cleanup is a snap. No sticky bowls or utensils to wash. Just unplug and let everything cool down. Wipe off the inside and outside with a damp cloth. You can wash and rinse the inside of the bread pan and kneading blade, but don't immerse the pan in water. This mixing mechanism could malfunction if it gets wet. If you have a loaf that overrises and hits the lid, like this one did, there's a super way to clean your machine. After the bread maker is cooled, remove the bread pan and use a plastic spatula to scrape any loose dough from the lid. Then move the bread maker to the countertop next to the sink. Position it so the lid is hanging into the sink. Use a pastry brush to sweep the crumbs from inside the bread maker. Wipe the inside of the bread maker with a damp cloth. Well, be sure to support the lid with one hand, then using a wet dishcloth or sponge, soak any burned-on dough to loosen. Use a scrub pad to remove any stubborn spots. Rinse thoroughly and towel dry. And if any water has accumulated in the outer lid, wipe it down with a towel to prevent it from running down the inside or outside of the bread maker when you stand it back up. Now let's explore some of the other features of your Regal bread maker. I like a heartier crust on my bread, so let's make a 1 1/2 pound rye bread from page 29 of your cookbook using the French setting. Now the French setting takes 3 hours and 40 minutes and includes a third rise. You'll notice the recipe calls for 1 1/2 teaspoons white vinegar. Now, this helps to build the dough structure of rye bread and will give you a better texture and higher loaf. Once you've added all the ingredients, select the French cycle and press start. If you check about 10 minutes into the kneading cycle, you'll see that the rye dough is much stickier than the white bread dough. Now, this is normal for a rye bread, and there is no need to add flour. And here's our rye bread. Any bread can be baked on the French cycle to get a thicker, heartier crust. To make 100% whole wheat bread, we will be using the recipe on page 30 of the cookbook. I recommend using the 1 1/2 pound normal bread setting and repeating the knead cycle. This extra kneading time will boost the whole grain flour and give you a higher, lighter bread. Because whole wheat flour is naturally lower in gluten, it is usually mixed with bread flour to make whole wheat bread. Since this recipe uses all whole wheat flour, it needs some added vital gluten to give it an additional lift. Vital gluten is the dried protein taken from flour and is a good dough enhancer. For this 1 1/2 pound recipe, we add 1 tablespoon. For a more complete guide to gluten and its role in bread making, you'll want to refer to page 20 of your cookbook. Lock the pan into the bread maker. Then press the select button for the 1 1/2 pound setting, and then press start. Now, immediately set a separate timer, like this one, or the one on your stove, for 13 minutes. When that timer goes off, the time display will read 217. Press the stop button on your bread maker. Then press the select button to get the 1 1/2 pound cycle and press start. You'll hear the mixing and kneading. If you allow the first cycle to continue past the 13 minutes, you may get an EO1 signal in your display window. That means the machine is already warm and needs to cool down. Just open the lid and wait for the beep, about 10 to 15 minutes before you press start again. To show you the difference, I bake the same recipe with and without the extra kneading cycle. Your 100% whole wheat bread should look much like this, nicely rounded, with a good even texture inside. Let's use the timer to make an oatmeal bread from page 28 of your cookbook. When you're using the timer, it's really important to add the ingredients as listed. Liquids first, then dry ingredients. The last thing you'll be adding is the yeast. It is important that it be kept dry and away from the salt. To do this, carefully measure the salt into the corners of the bread pan. 1 teaspoon, 1/4 teaspoon. Before you add the yeast, make a small indentation or well in the middle of the mound of dry ingredients with a spoon. And place the yeast in the middle of it like so. 1 teaspoon, 2 teaspoons, 1/4 teaspoon. This will keep it dry until the machine mixes the ingredients. Now remember, don't use fresh ingredients like milk, eggs, fruit, or vegetable purees because they could spoil while sitting in the bread maker. Press the select button for the size loaf you're making, then set the timer. Now the timer works on hours, not by time of day. So if it's 9 p.m. and you want to have fresh hot bread for breakfast at 7:30 a.m., that would be 10.5 hours. Press the plus or forward button until you reach 10 hours, 30 minutes. The timer advances in 10-minute increments, but if you hold the buttons down, it advances quickly. If you go past the time, simply press the minus button to go back. Once the timer is set, press the start button. The colon of the display window will flash and then start counting down. At precisely the correct moment, the bread maker will begin the cycle and you'll be waking up to the aroma of freshly baked bread. Now, I know it sounds silly to remind you, but if you don't press start after you set the timer, you'll wake up to a cold bread pan full of ingredients. A real poor substitute for fresh hot bread. Believe me, I've done it. The timer can be used for 1.5 pound normal, 1.5 pound dark, 1 pound, and the French setting. It cannot be used for the sweet or dough settings. To demonstrate the sweet setting, let's bake the nutty raisin bread on page 36 of your cookbook. Add your ingredients as listed, except for the raisins and nuts. Select the sweet setting. The sweet setting is made for breads containing high amounts of sugar, fats, or protein. This setting includes a third rise and bakes at a lower temperature to avoid over-browning of the crust. Press start, then set a separate timer for 10 minutes. Now when that timer sounds, the time display will read 3 hours and 30 minutes. Start adding the raisins and nuts a few at a time, like this. If the machine is not mixing the raisins and nuts into the dough, hold a spatula on top of the dough, like so, for 3 to 5 minutes to improve the mixing. If you add the raisins too soon, they'll get chewed up. Look at the difference between a loaf where we put the raisins in right away and then the one where we waited 10 minutes to add them. Follow this same procedure for adding the fruit and nuts in any recipe. Some fruits don't distribute as well as others. If you find you're having a problem, try dusting the fruit with bread flour before adding them. The dough cycle allows you to prepare doughs for anything from dinner rolls to cinnamon rolls, even pizza dough, all ready for hand shaping and conventional baking. We made the pizza dough from page 52. Now here's one recipe that uses regular all-purpose flour. That's because height and shape are not important. We added the ingredients and pressed the select button to reach the dough cycle. Then press start. An hour and 20 minutes later, we've got dough all ready for hand shaping. Let's get the dough out of the pan. Now pat it into a large greased pizza pan. Then let it stand for 10 minutes. Spread pizza sauce over the dough, add your favorite toppings, and bake the pizza at 400 degrees for 15 to 20 minutes. If you were making rolls, you would remove the dough from the bread maker and shape it as desired. And cover the rolls and let them rise a final time until they just about double in size. This usually takes about 1 hour, and then they are ready for baking. The book gives you some real good ideas for making rolls on pages 42 and 43. I hope this video, along with a handy guide and cookbook, will help you get the best results from your Regal bread maker. There are hundreds of different breads that can be made. I encourage you to be creative and experiment with the recipes. Use the amounts listed in the book as a guide to figure the correct proportions in any new recipes. If you run into a problem or have a question, please call Regal toll-free at 1-800-998-8809 to talk to one of our bread-making experts. And thank you for buying a Regal automatic bread maker. Look for these and other fine Regal products for your home at stores near you.